Hey guys, welcome to this installment of Mike's Vehicle Vlogs. And today I'm going to take a break from the backlot cars. I've got a lot of backlot cars coming up. I already put 2 videos out of the backlot cars. And I've got 2 more videos that I had recently recorded as well because we got a lot of interesting ones in the other day. I mean, I was filming them right off the truck, basically. I kind of went a little crazy and filmed a phone video of the backlot cars, and I feel like instead of putting those out right away, I'll just go ahead and talk about one more car that my family has owned. And basically, I don't have a whole lot of stuff, I don't really have a whole lot of memorabilia here that involves this vehicle. I do have some video footage that I dug up, a little bit of footage, including a brief tour of the van that you will see. So this might be the last vehicle vlog that includes a car from the past, because I'm pretty sure I've talked about just about every single car that that I've had as a child. I'm pretty sure that we mentioned it over the years. So this video is going to be on the 1995 Ford Windstar, which is the very last minivan that my family has owned. So as usual, before I go into the history behind our particular Windstar, let's just briefly go over the Windstar's history from the beginning. So basically, the Ford Windstar was a minivan that Ford had made starting for the 1995 model year. So the one that we had was of the very first Windstars out there. And basically, it was replacing the previous Ford minivan, which was known as the Aerostar. The Windstar definitely had more round curves and it looked modern for its time, whereas the Aerostar was still looking pretty blocky and square and such. But this Windstar, when they introduced the Windstar, it just looked very nice. Curves everywhere, lots of round shapes, and like I said, for 95, it was definitely something that needed to be updated from the Aerostar. So the Windstar for 1995 was available in 2 trim levels. There was a GL and there was an LX. The LX being the more, the higher up model. So the GL was pretty basic. Both models for 95 only came with one engine, and that was the 3.8 liter V6. But that would change later on after 1995. They would incorporate the 3 liter V6 as a standard engine option. As far as the very first generation of the Windstar goes, 1997 included some cosmetic changes. So the front grille, actually, most of the front end had been completely redesigned, and they added on a really interesting feature because at this point in time, a lot of the minivans started to incorporate dual sliding doors on the back for rear passengers instead of just having one door on the right side of the vehicle. However, Ford did not incorporate that onto the Windstar. Instead, they made a larger driver's door so that way passengers getting in behind the driver, it would be more of like the type of scenario that you find on a 2-door car where the door is a little bit longer and you can move the seat up and crawl into the back. It was really strange, but that is what Ford did with the Windstar. Toward the end of its first generation, they decided to just make the driver's door bigger and not put a sliding door there. So it was interesting. So if you look at, if you look at a later Windstar from the first generation, you will notice that the driver's door is slightly longer compared to the driver's door on a older Ford Windstar. So then there was a second generation Windstar that debuted for 1999, and it pretty much lasted up until 2003. After 2003, there was the third generation, but instead of keeping it with the Windstar name, they called it the Freestar. and you can tell that it was the same minivan. There wasn't too much that had changed as far as the styling. The Freestar kept a lot of the previous Windstar styling cues, but they just, for some reason, changed the name, and I'm not exactly sure why. But the Freestar would be taken out of production, so the last model year was 2007, and basically Ford has what is called the Transit vans now. The Transit obviously comes in large sizes, so you can either have it as a passenger vehicle or as a cargo vehicle for like delivering businesses and such. But then there's also the Transit Connect, which would be the equivalent to a smaller minivan. Again, you can also have that with passenger seats or just a plain cargo floor for delivery. So that is the only van right now that Ford is making. So the Windstar was from 95 up until about 2007 if you just want to run all three generations together. Now, I've talked about all of the other minivans that my family have had. The Windstar turned out to be our last minivan, and we didn't even have it for that long. We only had it for, it was probably maybe 2 years at the most. We acquired our Windstar in February of 2002, and in fact, the video that you're going to see here in a little bit was filmed the day after we had purchased it. So when you see it, it is, as is when we got it. It had about 58,000 miles on the odometer, and I honestly have no idea what the mileage was when we got rid of it. But I'll get to that part later. So in my opinion, I really liked the Voyager minivans that we had, and they were good vans in my opinion. I always thought that they were comfortable, but this Windstar, it really took my taste in the minivan. It notched it up some because it probably was the most comfortable van that we had ever owned. Not just the ride comfortability and such, but the seats alone were pretty comfortable from what I remember. I remember driving this van. I actually got my permit, my driving permit, while we had this van, so I drove this van a lot, and I enjoyed driving it. It seemed to handle okay for its time. It was red. I wish I knew what the exact color red it was. Let me see if I can find it real quick, because I really liked the red that was on there. Yes, from the looks of this, it looks like the color was called Laser Red Metallic. I know the red on the earlier Windstar models were different from the red that they would put on the later Windstar models. But yeah, so that one was called Laser Red Metallic, and I really liked that color red. It was a very nice color. And we had the gray interior. Like I said, it was a GL, so there wasn't a whole lot that came with this van when we got it. I'm pretty sure it did not have cruise control. It did not have power door locks. It did not have power windows. It did not have a cassette player. It had just a basic AM/FM stereo. It did have audio controls in the back though, which was neat. So the second row passengers, if you were sitting up against the side behind the driver, like right up against the window, there was like a little center, or not a center console, but like a little console there, and it had 2 headphone jacks and audio controls, so you can plug in headphones, and it would broadcast what was playing through the radio, to your headphones, and you can adjust the volume, or you can actually turn the speakers off throughout the entire cabin and just have it through the headphones only. We did put a CD player in the van not too long after we got it, so those controls were pretty much useless after that. That's all I really have to describe the van at this time. So, let's go ahead and take a look at some of the video that I have of the van, and then I will kind of go into a little bit as to the problems that arose with the van as we had owned it. So, here's some video footage. Enjoy.
Nice red. That's one of Chelsea's pictures. I gotta get those out of there. There's a piece missing up there. We're gonna get that fixed, and that's a dealer place. So. My dad works there! There's the inside of the door. And that's the inside of the other one. And there's a picture of Chelsea upside down. And here's the inside. We've got a car with a tack. See the tack. And a big speedometer. And those. And we got vents. And we got no cassette player. But my dad's going to put in the CD player. We got air controls. And there's only one cup holder because the other one's broken. See, this one, that one. And we got space in there. And a steering wheel. And we got a thing that flashes the high beams. Let's get in the back. We got nice back space and the seats are comfortable. And there's radio buttons back here too for headphones. And you can turn the big speakers off, and there's those. And we have a floor light. And look where the emergency brake is. That's a cool little boot. And there's like a big cubby hole in there, bigger than the Voyagers. And I'm the only one that don't get a cup holder. There's one right there. And there's one right there. And there's one right there. But where do I couldn't put mine? I got the door. Well, I guess that's better than a cup holder, really. And now under the hood. With very limited hood capacity space. Everything's kind of crammed. And you can hardly get to that thing back there. See? It like goes all the way back there. That's like hard to get to. So I guess that's the engine over top. It sounds like a truck when you start it. Well, I guess that's about it. What will he order?
You guys. Okay.
Do you want the party?
Kevin. I'd like a number 7 or
Party.
and
I want the party.
we have Pop at home. Okay, and then
Christmas comes but once a year, so
That's weird. Christmas does come once a year. I wish it came every week. So I'm gonna eat a lot of beets. I love beets. I asked for extras. So look
At school?
Yeah, and she's like, go ahead. No one wants them anyway.
Yeah. She does that all the time. I'm like, may I please have extra beets? She's like, yeah.
I don't like beets.
And
I
then
love
everybody's saying, no beets, no beets, no.
Yeah.
Pick up snow next to, like, put it in a bowl. There you go.
Michael, can you shut my door? You know, Tyler, will you stop it now? Michael, shut my door.
So if memory serves me right, one of the very first issues that we had with the van was actually when we brought it home. It had seemed that the coolant temperature was always higher than normal, and it definitely isn't a good sign. It didn't necessarily overheat, but it would peg pretty high. So my dad looked into it. Turns out whoever did maintenance to the cooling system at one point or another did something backwards, I guess. And the coolant somehow was not flowing in the correct direction. I don't know. It all had to do with a hose that was not put on right, or something along those lines. But it was something that my dad figured out, and sure enough, once it was reversed, the van seemed to run like normal. So that was just a really weird mystery in the very beginning, and I really wish I knew what the exact cause of that was, but I just remember him saying something was keeping the coolant from running in the correct direction, therefore it wasn't getting the proper circulation, and it was running hotter than it should be. So again, I'm not quite sure, but that was the first issue we had. Sometime in 2002, still, we did have another issue with the van, and that was the ignition switch had gone out. So the van was not starting when it goes into the start position. You could turn the key over and you could have all the lights and stuff come on, but when you got it to start, it did not turn anything over to the starter. So it took 3 days for a technician to actually diagnose the problem, because we had the van taken to a shop, and it took them 3 days to figure out that it wasn't the starter and it wasn't any other electrical issue. It turned out to be the ignition switch. So the ignition switch was obviously replaced, and everything seemed to be just fine. But when we got the van back after the ignition switch had been replaced, the airbag light was on, and I would later find out, many years later, that the guy that was running the shop was actually stealing airbag modules and ABS modules from cars of his customers. So that is probably what happened with the airbag situation in this van. We did not take the van back to get the airbags fixed. I don't really know why we didn't, but the excuse afterwards that the shop gave us was that they ended up chafing a wire when they were putting the ignition switch in, and therefore it's just a bad wire. But like I said, turned out to be a thief in the long run. There was one situation also, I think in 2003, where my mom had called my dad and I. We were at home, and she said that there was smoke coming out of the van. And she freaked out, of course, so she pulled it over. Turned out a strut had collapsed, and the front right strut had collapsed, so it was grinding up against the tire and causing a bunch of smoke. So it was a good thing that she had pulled over, because obviously if the tire had blown out, that could have been really bad. But it just turned out that there was a bunch of smoking because the strut had collapsed and it was burning up against the tire, basically. So we had to have the entire strut replaced. And from there on out, I don't know if there were really many other issues with the van up until right before we had to get rid of it. But one of the bigger things that ended up giving us problems toward the end of the ownership anyway was the transmission. And I think at this time Ford was known for having faulty transmissions in a lot of vehicles. Like I think a lot of the Tauruses around that time and such, they were prone to having transmission issues. So the Windstar, I'm pretty sure, fell into that category. But we had a problem going from first to second gear. So usually when it was cold, the transmission would kind of get stuck in neutral when it was going from first gear to second gear. But then usually after it warmed up, it would start to be fine. My dad did change the transmission fluid and the filter in this van when it started acting up like that, and it really did not fix it. So there obviously was a much more bigger issue that was taking place. And because of all of the high revs that my mom would put the van through whenever the transmission would go into that weird shift pattern, the engine eventually started to develop a rod knock. Now this rod knock could have been from a couple of different things. It could have been from all of the revving that would take place when we were trying to get the transmission to engage into second gear, or it could be because maybe a head gasket went on this engine, because the 3.8 liter V6 engines, which are also known as the Essex engines, they were prone to head gasket failure almost just as much as GM's 31, 34, and 3800 engines were prone to head gasket issues. I don't really know if it's the same exact issue where it has to do with the type of coolant that was used, or if they were just faulty from the start. But our engine could have had a head gasket issue, and I just never knew about it. But I always just thought it was because of the high revs of trying to get the engine to go from gear to gear sometimes. But it started getting pretty bad. It lasted a while. We had that van for quite a while still when it started doing the knock, and it seemed to be, even though it was knocking, it would be annoying and it would be loud, especially toward the end. But the engine really did not have a whole lot of it didn't give us any problem. It would run all the time, but it was just annoying. So yeah, it finally got to the point where this van was just becoming a big hindrance, and I think it was the very beginning of 2004 maybe, we just ended up selling the van. It was because there were a couple of factors involved. It was actually around the time that my parents had divorced, so my dad had left, and my mom, who wasn't making very much money to try and support all of us at that time, she just couldn't afford to have the van fixed. So we just ended up just getting rid of it. It got to a point where the engine was close probably to seizing. It got to a point where I told her we just can't drive it anymore. So we didn't really know anybody at the time who could rebuild an engine or such, and we just thought it was for the best at the time. I at this point had my own car, which was my first Pontiac Sunbird, my very first car. So my mom and I were sharing that at the time that we had decided to get rid of the Windstar, and pretty much that's pretty much where the story with the Windstar ends, guys. But needless to say, for the time that we did have it, even through the transmission and rod knock, it really wasn't a bad van. To this day, I would not mind having one for myself if I needed a van. It would be one of my picks. Don't know if I would pick the Voyager over the Windstar. They're pretty close. I really, really liked the Voyager vans that we had, but I also really, really liked the Windstar for a lot of other reasons. I like the way that it looks inside and out, especially the inside. The inside interior is a really awesome design. I like how it drove. I like how it rode. But there again, the issues that came about that kind of forced us to get rid of the van should not have been necessary. Well, guys, I really think that that's it. I don't really have any other vehicles to talk about from my past. I think I've covered everything that I have memory of, and that I usually have something here to remind me of these vehicles. But pretty sure I just covered all of them. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Don't forget to give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to comment. Don't forget to subscribe. If you had if you had a Windstar, or if you have a Windstar or whatnot, what do you think about it? Any issues that were similar to what we encountered? Drop a comment down below. Let us know. Also, check out Mike's Vehicle Spotlight, which is the official vehicle touring segment that I post here on this channel. I hope you enjoyed all of these, vehicle history stories. Maybe one day I will be able to talk about another vehicle somewhere along the lines in the family past. But I covered up pretty much all of the immediate ones that were here, so I don't know what I'll bring to you next from this chair. But of course, I'll always have other vlogs to film and other topics to discuss. I will see you guys later. Take care.
Michael, you better want to get this. Michael, I'm gonna put the sewer lid down.
Wait, I'm messing around.